Welcome to the Plant-Based Podcast. Did you know that plants are truly amazing? Not only can you grow them and eat them, you can also wear them, drink them, nourish your skin with them, and so much more. Let Ellen and Michael inspire you to love plants as much as they do, as they chat with the movers and shakers in this wonderful plant-based world. So, let's dig in.
Hey guys, something a little bit different for you this week. It's a solo episode with me, Mr. Plant Geek. I'm talking to Stefan Burger, and he is known as the Cactus Explorer online. You'll find him on TikTok, Instagram, and various other platforms. And I spoke to him about cacti and succulents because he's been interested in them ever since he was a child growing up in Australia. And now he lives in Chile and he gets to see them almost every day in the wild. But more importantly, we talked about plant poaching, which is a big problem, especially when it comes to cacti and succulents as they get more and more collectible. So I hope you really enjoy this episode. I really enjoyed chatting to Stefan, and I learned a lot about cactus as well, and I wasn't afraid to ask very basic questions. So I'm really pleased that he accommodated some of my potentially dumb questions about cactus. But sometimes you can grow up thinking you understand a plant, but actually there's a lot more to it. So I really hope you enjoy this. Next week, we're actually kicking off Series 6, and we'll be here with a new sponsor, which is CJ Wildlife. And our first episode is still a top secret, but it's something that will help you this season in the garden, whatever you're looking to grow. So until next week, when Ellen will be back as well, enjoy the episode. Anyway, thank you for joining me today. I'm so excited to get you on the podcast. This is first of my solo sessions because between our series, we tend to have kind of little solo bits where Ellen and I go off, we interview people on our own, and we just kind of calling these the winter sessions. But of course, Stefan Burger, introduce you to the podcast, but you're somewhere that winter doesn't exist right now because where are you calling in from today?
So I'm in the city of Antofagasta in northern Chile, and in the north here, it's a little hard to distinguish sometimes what time of year it is. Winter is very mild. I mean, the lowest temperature we get is like 10 or 11 degrees at night time, but it never really gets too hot though. It probably maxes out at around about 30 degrees. So it's a very stable climate.
That sounds almost like an English climate, to be honest.
Really?
And we're usually happy when it's 10 degrees. That is kind of summer to us, you know?
Yeah. But pretty much every day it gets to at least 17 or 18 degrees even in the winter. But like the minimum temperature in the early morning is like 10 degrees sometimes, and everyone complains. But it's normally around 15 in the night.
Okay. Well, let's introduce you properly. I think I'm so excited because I wanted to kind of have a one-on-one with you ever since you appeared during the British Cacti and Succulent Society on Zoom, and you were actually taking us on a tour of the mountains there to show us all the different wild cacti, which was absolutely amazing. So you're known on Instagram and various other platforms as Cactus Explorer. Your name's Stefan Burger. You're from Australia. You're actually in Chile at the moment, and I want to find out all about you because I only know little snippets here and there. I know you've got the most amazing cactus photography on Instagram, for example, and you see some amazing features. But tell me all about your background, where you're from in Australia, how did you land in Chile, and what do you do in Chile as well?
Right, so
that's a lot to unpack, I know.
No, it's all good. Yeah, just my life story, nothing major. So I grew up in country Victoria in southern Australia, so kind of remote, around about 3 hours outside of Melbourne, and I spent a lot of time with my grandparents. They retired from farming and then bought a property in a small country town, and they had a really beautiful landscape garden. They had bits of everything, and amongst that were some cacti, orchids, succulents, some kind of exotic plants. that really captured my attention.
Mm-hmm.
But I really especially like the spiny plants. Any plant that had a spine on it was really, really interesting to me. I mean, cacti have really incredible flowers, of course, but I was just really interested in the body morphology. And of course, cacti don't grow natively in Australia. They're plants which are practically 100% endemic to the Americas. So it was just something really novel and interesting for me. So I began to collect them, and then my grandparents noticed my interest, and they bought me a little cactus encyclopedia. Actually, my uncle bought me the encyclopedia, but my nan used to get gardening magazines and would cut out all the articles and make scrapbooks and then identify them and stuff. So that's what sparked the interest. And that was around about when I was like 8 or 10 years old, so I was pretty young. And then, well, you know, life sort of takes you in different directions. When I finished high school, I actually started working in engineering, in an engineering workshop, so doing metal fabrication. And then I went into mining for a couple of years. And then after that, I decided that I wanted to pursue a career more in the sciences. So I went to study applied science at uni, majoring in health. And after I did that, I worked in it for a little bit, but then I'd sort of worked for about 10 or 12 years full time. And then I thought, right, it's time to take a bit of an extended vacation. So basically I just took essentially a later gap year in life, you know, when I was around about 27, and just bought a one-way ticket to South America and started backpacking around. And the cacti were fantastic, and the people were fantastic too. And I actually, we'll have a family here in Chile now. We've got I've got a 3-year-old son, so I'm sort of I've gone in 100%.
Oh wow, that is amazing. And you're obviously on your cactus kind of explorations there as well. But are you working there, or you're mainly just kind of doing the cactus content, or what are you up to now?
Yeah, so I do various things within Chile. I mean, when I actually arrived here, I didn't have any social media, believe it or not. I had nothing. I was sharing some photos with just travel companions, and, you know, we'd sort of sit there in hostels and look at pictures, and they're like, wow, you have so many photos of cacti. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, oh, you should make a themed Instagram account on Facebook. And I'm like, really? You think people like that? And they're like, yeah. And I remember I just made the account. I started just uploading photos, and I was really surprised at how quickly the account grew and how many people started asking more about the plants, you know, really interested in the habitat. And then people started asking if I did tours. So that's where the idea for ecotourism began. And it's been a really interesting journey. So I work in just general tourism here as well, just because the Atacama Desert's on San Pedro. The Atacama is really famous for its really interesting geology, topography, and there's a lot of cultural history here too, with the Amerindians and Incas as well. They're also in parts of Chile. So, Chile's got some really diverse and interesting habitats. I mean, in the north, you've got the Atacama Desert, but in the central zone, it's very Mediterranean climate. And then you go south and you've got Patagonia, and that's obviously really...
because it's really, really long, isn't it? But not very wide, right?
It's long and narrow. So it's over 4,000 kilometers long or tall. And it averages around about 120 kilometers across. So
that's amazing.
It's quite bizarre, really, when you think about it and you look at it. But it's a very well organized country. It's easy to travel in. There's one major highway from the south to the north, the Pan American Highway, and then each region is just stacked one on top of the other. So, like, logistically, it's very easy to get around in.
So you could drive top to bottom and see all those different climates in just a few days, I guess. Yeah.
If you wanted to, you could. You could. So it's pretty amazing. You can go from like the world's driest desert in the north to seeing glaciers in the south. So it's pretty incredible.
So you're kind of there working on like as a cactus tourist then, essentially.
Yeah, as a tour guide essentially. So I lead botanical tours, not just related to cacti, but that's the main focus of most of the tours that I do. But it's botanical tourism. But I've also worked, especially in the first couple of years, I got into just really general tourism, taking people to the classic touristic places. But the cacti thing is a very niche area, but it definitely has an interest and a following. But I also did English teaching as well. And I still do that a little bit part-time as well. Yeah. Especially in the pandemic time, I got back into the English teaching more as well.
Yeah, because that's probably stopped a little bit of your touring, but it's back up now, right? I would say.
Yeah, I've been working mostly with Chilean clients, but as of December, the borders are open to international tourists again.
Really?
So
that's good.
Yeah, but people in general are still kind of tentative. It's difficult for people to really commit at the moment, especially after all the scares with COVID and
and not them being caught and stuck somewhere. I think that's a real fear. Even I'm planning to go to France in a couple of weeks, but even that is kind of like a real leap of faith. It seems so strange compared to how freely we used to travel. Yeah.
And so I really notice that when I've talked with people, they're very tentative about buying tickets and committing to that. So, and
definitely that damage will take a while to heal, actually, won't it?
Yeah, it's a complicated time for tourism, but in the beginning, I was mainly focused on international clients, but as my Spanish has improved over the years, I've gained more confidence with that. So now I'm working some more with Chilean clients as well. Yeah.
That's cool. And where do you learn about your cacti and succulent kind of knowledge? Are you learning from some local guides as well to find out where the colonies are and kind of all of this? How have you learned what you know?
Yeah, that's interesting. In the beginning, I actually found it very difficult to find information about location data. And it was really tricky because there are a couple of like vague field guides. Actually, the best one that exists is actually in Spanish, but there's not a decent guide that exists in English. Okay. And even so, they don't give you, for example, GPS coordinates. And some of the plants are highly cryptic in habitat and geophytic and very difficult to find unless you're in the habitat at the right moment or you have a lot of luck. So basically, I began talking to other cactus and succulent experts. And the person who helped me the most is actually Rudolf Schultz. He's an Australian. He lives in New Zealand now, but he actually wrote a couple of books on Copiopoa, which is an endemic genus of cactus to Chile.
Okay.
And he spent a lot of time in the field, like literally years, exploring habitat. And there's also been a couple of Chilean people as well who have spent a lot of time in habitat. So it's basically just connecting in the network and talking with people because there's a ton of information that doesn't get shared even in publications. You really have to go straight to the source and get that field experience knowledge.
It's strange sometimes, like we assume, like I guess in the age of Wikipedia and even plant encyclopedias, that all the information's out there. But recently I've been putting a bit of a book together and I've really come up against blanks with some plants of like, how it's pollinated or how this happens. And because the information's not there and we're kind of finding out this stuff still real time, aren't we? It's just, we don't know as much about plants as we could by any stretch,
No, and you find that pretty quickly, even when you're reading academic articles, they always make suggestions for future research and, for the holes that we still have. And it depends on where the plants grow as well, because a lot of habitats are pretty wild, especially when you're talking about Latin America and South America, Central America. So, I mean, the people who discovered these plants were they were seriously like Indiana Jones characters. It wasn't very common for some of these people to die of old age. Let me put it that way. Like this is some pretty serious, pretty incredible adventurers that we're talking about here. And a lot of them sort of go like unsung heroes because their stories are just incredible, especially when you start talking to a lot of the people the botanists even who did a lot of the field work. So, for example, North America within the United States and Canada, it's been really thoroughly explored and documented. A lot of major universities come from there, but there's a lot of places in South America, Central America that just have not got the same amount of attention and also difficult access to habitats, language barriers, you name it, it sort of happens here. So, there's a lot of stuff to still be discovered and explored even. There's a lot of unexplored terrain here in South America especially too.
You must have been, when you first arrived in Chile and you were like seeing wild cactus, you must have been like fangirling, right? Because I know I was when I first went to the US and I saw the Seguro cactus. And these are the ones like you see in the old Western films and it's like, that is a real plant. And it's just, I'd be the same if I get to see Venus flytrap in the wild as well. Just when you see a plant in its natural location, it suddenly becomes more real,
Yeah.
Yeah,
because you see something in cultivation, as a house plant or sold at Home Depot, and it's completely out of its context. It's in a pot.
It doesn't feel real.
It doesn't, and you see it. And obviously, juvenile plants can look very different from mature ones, and quite often the climate, for example, places like England, it's almost impossible to grow a lot of more exotic cacti outside because of the climate. So you never really get to see them in their full maturity. You get up some large greenhouses and botanical gardens, which they can get quite sizable inside, but it's nothing like walking through a wild population in habitat.
Because they're wild and that seed has set there, they've been pollinated, everything's happened in the wild. It blows my mind, really. So what was it like when you first saw those populations?
Well, just thinking about it now, I'm sort of getting those spinal shivers and tingles because it was really a really profound experience for me. I mean, it was something that I literally dreamed about. I researched and read so much about it before coming, and to actually be in context, in situ, and seeing plants that are hundreds of years old, in some cases potentially thousands. It's just something incredible that you can't experience anywhere else. You can only experience in habitat. And so for me, that was just fascinating, and cacti tend to grow in quite beautiful places, in my opinion. I mean, I love geology and topography, so desert habitats enable you to see all of that in context. If you go to a forest or a jungle, a lot of that's all covered. You can't see the geology. And so having that combination of cacti and geology in the one spot for me was just really incredible.
There was a picture you put, or a video a couple of days ago, that is like a kind of mountainous, like a column cactus, a little short one, like a mammillaria. I know it's probably not that at all. Kind of interspersed with the brightly coloured kind of flowers as well that were not cactus whatsoever. Things like that are just amazing, and the expanse of them is just mind-blowing for me.
And that's the thing, seeing a highly functioning population. I mean, we're talking about thousands, quite often hundreds of thousands of plants in the one location. So it can be completely overwhelming. And I go to the same habitats many times, and each time I go there, it's different. It depends on how much rain has occurred, the time of year, different birds or pollinators in the area, depending on the time of year. And it's just so fascinating to keep revisiting the same places. And people are like, why would you keep going to the same habitat?
No, it's always changing. And
it is. It's always changing and evolving. And you notice something different every time you go. And it's fascinating. There's a great documentary actually on Netflix called My Master, the Octopus or something. I don't know. I watched it in Spanish.
I need to watch that.
And so this guy goes diving, looking, following octopus populations, and he does it every day for a year. And he says the same thing. He just noticed something different about the habitat every single time.
Yeah, totally. Do you think, would you say environments like that are less explored than, say, rainforests? Or not? Because would it be perceived as less interesting or more dangerous, or do you think there's a difference or not?
Look, I think it sort of depends on the person who's interested in researching it. But the thing is with rainforests, they can actually be very difficult habitats to get around in. And especially when you're talking about studying trees, I mean, you've got flowers which are 40 feet up in the canopy, and they're incredibly hard to study. And you see people with harnesses and everything going up there. But the thing with the desert is you rarely get tall plants. Most of the plants are quite short and small, and they're much easier to study, and the habitat's generally easier to navigate and get around in. But I think they get overlooked by a lot of botanists in general. They tend to go to more humid places and look for more diversity, not like
because it's hostile. You have to look for stuff, and I see on some of the Instagram pictures there's cacti that are almost buried beneath the ground, so you've really got to have a different observation eye for it. And obviously a lot of stuff is then camouflaged as well, and it takes a lot of patience, and I noticed that I've developed that throughout the years of traveling in habitat, because I've done various tours, and you notice that people tend to be very rushed in modern day life and society, and it's like that when they come to habitat. So people don't know how to even behave sometimes in a really silent
habitat. It kind of gets them nervous, and people are looking, I don't have signal here, I don't have service, and it's like, you really need to slow this down, take a look, because the cacti here a lot of the time are literally growing below the ground, like you say, they're geophytes. And it takes a lot of patience and time to train the eye.
Geophyte, just for listeners, means to grow below the ground. Is that right?
So a geophyte...
I'm not a botanist, so I don't always know these phrases. So I'm learning with the listener very often.
By definition, it's a plant which has evolved like an underground storage organ. So it can be a taproot or a rhizome. So, I mean, let's start with something everyone knows as a vegetable. A carrot can actually be defined as a geophyte. So what you're actually eating is the root of the plant, which is the taproot, the carrot. But then you've got this above ground vegetative growth. And so, generally speaking, they're perennial plants. And I mean, something that people would be familiar with is Dioscorea or Euphorbia. A lot of those plants are geophytic in habitat. Alstromerias are also classified as a geophyte. They produce underground rhizomes. So it's what it is. It's a plant which lives in a place which generally has a drought period. So the vegetative growth above ground dies off in the dry season, but in the wet season, when the rain comes, it will reshoot again. So, I mean, a bulb is a geophyte too, like a tulip or...
Okay, and some cactus would be that as well, because a lot of them are below the ground that you don't see.
So a lot of the time, some of these cacti, they literally 90% of the plant is below ground. So you have this really massive taproot that is basically just like a carrot, but white in colour. And then you've got a tiny little pancake at the top, which is the cactus body or the shoot. And so that's the part which is... So basically all that does is it's minimal function in habitat. It's generating photosynthesis and it's reproducing. So that's basically the only function, but 90% of the plant is actually below ground, so that's where it stores all of its water and nutrients in that taproot. And they're very, very tiny plants. So after a rain, they can sort of rise up above ground level by, 10 or 20 millimeters in some cases. And then in the dry season, their ribs and their tubercles allow them to contract down. And that contractile root actually pulls them down below ground level so they can survive the drought, essentially. So they're really fascinating plants. I've become completely obsessed.
And I guess kind of on a basic level, the spines are obviously there to protect from predators and kind of because that's where some of the moisture is as well when predators, because obviously come along for that, right? Yeah,
so spines actually serve multiple functions. So on a lot of cacti, the most obvious function is defense, but they also actually help to collect moisture from the atmosphere. So when you think about a dewy morning at home, like on the grass blades or the leaf blades, the surface areas which cool down quicker actually attract more water when dew points reach. So a spine works really well to actually facilitate that collection of moisture. And in the fog deserts where they grow here in Chile, you get really thick fog and clouds coming in, and so that precipitation condensates on the spines and then actually runs down the column of the cactus. And the other thing which people don't often think about is shade. So having a lot of spines actually helps to shade the cactus as well, because they can be prone to overheating even though they're so well adapted to desert climates. And you get a lot of cacti, especially some types of mammillarias, like you said before. They actually have things called pectinate spines. And the spines almost look like feathers. So they're very delicate and they do nothing to protect the plant from a herbivore. But what they're doing is giving the plant shade and also helping to camouflage it as well.
That's really cool. And the ones that are kind of hairy a bit as well would be similar, but also bringing in moisture too?
Yeah, so generally speaking, the cacti which produce hair, so let's say Eryosis or Espestoa, they're normally high altitude cacti, especially the Eryosis, and the hairs actually help to shade the plant, so it's extra protection to help cover the epidermis and give it, cast a shadow. So because when we're talking about high altitude habitats, they're almost never cloudy. The UV rate is through the roof. Someone like me will burn in like 15 or 20 minutes. I'll be bright red. The sun is very intense. And so it's actually an adaptation to help protect them from excessive UV radiation and sunlight.
That's really interesting. You with so many plants, I don't understand a lot of these things because, of course, I never really focused on cactus heavily. Like I grew them when I was a kid, but in my career, I've mostly worked with, like patio plants, kind of bedding plants, kind of new trends and concepts. So it's really, really nice to dig down into what cactus are really about and how they work and what happens. So I'm going to ask a few more questions that are really going to help the listeners as well, which is, so how, when they flower, obviously when a cactus flowers, it is, oh my God, that is a showgirl moment, isn't it? You don't expect it at all. And then when it happens, it's like, oh my gosh, wow. So generally, how would a cactus get pollinated? What are the main pollinators for cactus? Or is there not really a rule? There's a lot of different creatures that would be helping out.
So it depends a little on the flower. So cacti which produce really bright colours are daytime flowers, and some which produce white colours too also flower in the daytime. But as a very general rule, cacti which have white flowers are a lot of them are nocturnal.
Yeah.
So when you have a nocturnal flower, the major pollinators are going to be bats or moths, nocturnal animals and insects. But in the daytime, we're going to be getting a lot of birds, but a lot of cacti are actually evolved to bee pollination and even fly pollination too, or wasp pollination. So in Chile, I've seen a lot of wasps, bees, flies pollinating cacti, and also hummingbirds as well.
Oh.
So, but yeah,
then obviously, and then mostly they'll produce like a berry that then has the seed inside. Yeah. Is that again a general rule, or are there different colours, or are they always a similar red kind of colour?
They can change in colour, but a lot of cactus fruit, it is pinky to reddy. But then you can have a lot of fruit which is just green as well, or yellow colours. But I mean, a really famous cactus fruit, which a lot of people don't associate with a cactus, is a dragon fruit.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
From Hylocereus. So that's a massive fruit. And that's, if you cut that open, you have that white pulp and you've got the black seeds. And that's pretty common with a lot of arborescent or tree type cacti. They produce a very large fruit. They look very, very similar inside to what you see in a dragon fruit. But that's not the case for a lot of them. A lot of the smaller ones, a lot of smaller collectible cacti have smaller fruit.
Yeah. And what is that relying on to distribute it, would you say?
It depends a little. Sometimes, in Chile, there's actually a genus called Eryosis, and a lot of the smaller cacti, they've got a really long tall fig-shaped kind of fruit, and it actually has hairs on it. And what they do is that oval shape and the hairs, it actually rolls along the ground so the wind dispersed.
Really?
And yeah, you can see them blowing along the ground like a tumbleweed or something like that.
What was that? Eryosis or
Eryosis or Eryosis, depends on how you like to. I can write it for you later. The spelling's a little tricky,
oh my God, that's really cool. Oh my God,
that's pretty cool.
Other than that, would it be like birds, or what would be generally?
Ants are a pretty major distributor of seeds. So some of the seeds of cacti even have like a tiny little bit of pulp attached to them, so that actually attracts the ant, and it will actually put the seed on its back or in its and then will carry it back to the nest. So
you say pulp.
Yeah. So like when you have the dragon fruit, for example, all of that white fleshy stuff is the pulp, and a lot of cacti have that on some scale, but dragon fruit's a really massive fruit, but it also grows in a subtropical, tropical zone, so there's lots of water available. But the cacti which grow in really dry deserts tend to not put or anywhere near as much effort into their fruit. It's a lot more bare, and it doesn't have much pulp in it at all because it just doesn't have the water availability to put into that fruit to develop it. Yeah.
Okay, because I guess when something looks like a fruit, like a berry, people would assume birds, but I guess the birds are not getting close because of the spines, potentially.
Yeah.
The ants are not so bothered.
It really it depends on the cactus. I mean, there's so many different kinds of symbiosis or pollination syndromes or fruit dispersal, seed dispersal syndromes that happen with different species. So, I mean, when you're talking about North America, sure, you have a lot of birds, you got a lot of parrots and stuff like that, which go and eat the seeds and then land on another tree and then disperse them under the tree. And that's a really important part of cactus ecology, because a lot of cacti need tend to need like a nurse plant, they call it. So that sort of dispersal mechanism works really well when birds eat the fruit of a cactus, land on a tree, and then disperse it at the base of the tree. But that's generally the case for larger cacti. Big, tall cacti will produce bigger fruit, and it'll be normally birds or bats which eat it and disperse it. But smaller cacti will be, different sort of mechanism, wind dispersal or ants. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is really fascinating to be able to talk to you about this. It's nice to have someone captive I can ask all my cactus questions to.
Yeah, I mean, I like other plants too, but, you know, my specialty or the plant family that I've researched the most has been the cactus family. And that's when you sort of really start to get an idea of how diverse the species are and the different symbioses that they have, or pollination syndromes, seed dispersal syndromes with other animals and bugs and stuff. So, I mean, there's just so much to learn about the plant world. You can talk to someone who's an expert in orchids or an expert in all kinds of different stuff, and you'll learn something new.
Definitely, and I think for me, it's like there's so much that I've had to learn with writing this book and putting everything together. It's just been, it's just mind blowing. You know, I'm filling up my notepad every day. Something. I was in Palm Springs, and I went to their cactarium, you know, at Morton Botanic Garden a few years ago. And I came away with a bill for healthcare because I got a spine in my foot. So have you ever had a cactus injury on your travels? You must have done, right?
Yeah.
It's a dangerous terrain to walk around in, surely.
Yeah, nothing too... actually... the most major thing that happened to me was actually a fall. So I was, I actually slipped on a pretty steep mountainside here in Chile and had a bit of a tumble, and that actually generated a little bit of a mini landslide, I guess you'd call it. But what happened was a rather large rock actually started to fall, and it hit me in the shin. And I actually ended up with a hematoma, so it burst a vein, and I had this massive lump on my leg, which, you know, started swelling up almost immediately. I thought I broke my leg. It was really painful.
Oh God! Were you on your own, or
I was on my own? Yeah, and I was with no phone service or anything. I lay there for about 15 minutes, kind of just in agony, and I was like, oh, I have to get back to the car. There's no way that I could, you know. That's the only option. So I had to stagger all the way back, like about an hour and a half down this mountain slope back to the car. Then drive like 2 hours or 3 hours almost back to Antofagasta. And I got there, and Cynthia, she's like, what have you done? Because I came back pretty late. And she's like, we have to go to the hospital. And they almost drained it, but I ended up sort of waiting it out, and it was not too bad. But I was kind of out of action for about a week over the whole ordeal. But that was the most sort of dangerous thing that's happened. But I have had incidents with spines too. You know, I've had them, come in on the side of legs or even under shoes. You know, always wear proper boots in habitat.
Yeah, definitely. I was wearing flip-flops, thongs, so it was my fault.
I've made the same mistake, and it's definitely...
oh my gosh.
It's had some pretty negative results, but
So where you live is like a couple of hours from where there's obviously cacti habitats at the Atacama, right?
Yeah. So actually there's habitat very close, which is only about a 15-minute drive from here, and there's a couple of really nice fog oases and locations to check out. Cool. But I do live in a very dry part of northern Chile on the edge of the Atacama Desert, but just a couple of hours south of here, it actually gets quite a lot. There's quite a lot of vegetation on the coast in the fog oases, and each of the different valleys can be more humid than the other. So it's an interesting kind of ecology which occurs here.
I have to put it on my list to visit. I literally got off doing a presentation for Winghaven in North Carolina, talk about wacky plants in my travels, and at the end they said, where do you want to travel next? And kind of in my head, kind of the continent where I haven't even touched is South America. You know, I've been in US, I've been in Central America, Costa Rica, but never anywhere further down. So maybe I'll book in on one of your tours.
Oh, yeah, that'd be great. Oh, you'd love it. There's some really incredible plants, landscapes, the whole thing for me.
Well, when you go around with someone, you learn so much more. And kind of like, you know, a couple of years ago when we were in Borneo, we had a local guide, and it's so much better and more enhanced than kind of trying to find stuff yourself. So
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how much time can just evaporate. People come and they hire a car for a week, but you can spend hours or days even just looking for one plant here, especially in Chile with the terrain, and the distances between habitats are often much greater than people anticipate. It's not like Mexico where you can just step out of the car and see 50 different species in one location. It's a lot of habitats are quite far apart to see a great species diversity. There are some sort of exceptions to that rule, but as a general rule, you have to travel quite far in the north. Yeah.
So do you have a kind of like a rough hit list in your head of certain cacti you want to see in the wild or find?
I do.
Yeah. Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, I've got a couple of I do have a couple of really great books, like encyclopedias, which, have most of the species in them. And I quite often flick through that, and then I'll say, wow, you know what, that cactus, I wonder why it looks like that. And I'll start to look into where it grows and its adaptations. And I'm like, and then I've become a little obsessed with it. I'm like, I have to go and see that in habitat. And so, that's a constant thing for me. I have probably an never-ending list of places and plants that I would love to see.
But also, I just wonder, because you'll know more because you're kind of living amongst the cactus, but we're always looking at wild plants. We talk about, how natives use plants in the rainforest for this and this and this. But are there ever any uses for cactus generally, medicinally or edible? I know things like, prickly pear, dragon fruit to eat. But aside from that, are there any uses that are kind of known?
Yeah, so one that comes to mind straight away is on the Altiplano here in Chile. You have a lot of really tall columnar cacti that look like the Carnegie giganteas, the saguaros from the United States and Mexico. And so what happens is when they die, they actually have a really solid cylindrical wooden trunk in the middle underneath all of that succulent tissue. And so it's very strong, and people use it for construction of housing and roofing and also furniture too. So it's very common here in Chile, especially in the Andean regions, to see furniture and older houses with the internal structures made out of cactus wood, and even doors. Wow. It's really quite interesting. So they use it for construction. And the fruit of so many cacti in so many countries has been used for centuries or thousands of years.
But I wonder if is cacti fruit generally edible? It's not poisonous, is it?
I don't know of a single cactus species which has a poisonous fruit. As far as I'm aware, they're all edible. Some more tasty than others, but yeah.
That's cool. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, we were going to talk today a little bit about kind of something that you share a lot on social media, talking about the problem with kind of poaching plants from the wild. So that's part of our focus on the podcast here today, to kind of bring that to a wider audience. Yeah. But first of all, to just kind of pull it back, it's kind of crazy. Everyone is mad about houseplants these days. And you can probably relate to this the same as me. Like when you were, 8, 9 years old, you were the guy growing your cactus on your windowsill, or maybe even outdoors in Australia, and kind of being amazed by that. But nobody else around you was interested in plants. And now, kind of however many years later, everyone is mad keen into houseplants. And I have such mixed emotions. I'm excited. I'm annoyed because I'm kind of like, well, I told you they were cool, but I'm also really pleased. But of course, there's some dangers with that, because houseplants becoming more popular. I think people are moving through the houseplants as well. So foliage plants have been popular. When people are then bored of, Alocassia and aroids, they're moving then into different kind of collectible items. And of course, with that comes cactus. And they're a cactus, I guess they're being harvested from the wild, which is not good at all. This is poaching. And I guess, is it happening more to cactus because they're so slow growing in captivity anyway, that kind of that is the real shortcut for people? So I think it's a good idea to kind of talk about that a little bit, and kind of what do you see as the main problems? What have you seen firsthand? And let's talk about what can be done about that potentially as well.
Yeah, look, the reasons that they're being poached are, like you said, a lot of them are very slow growing, and the characteristics that they produce in habitat are practically impossible to replicate in cultivation. So that's sort of the main motive.
Characteristics like what?
So, for example, a lot of Copiapoa cacti, which grow in Chile, produce a nice white farina, which is like
yes, I've seen these ones.
Which is a wax which a lot of succulents produce. And so for a Copiapoa to start producing that literally takes decades, even centuries, to produce a really thick coating because they grow so slowly. But if you grow them in cultivation, they do grow quicker, but they also most of the time fail to produce that white farina. So, in habitat, a Copiapoa columna alba, white column, it translates to, it has literally a white column because of the farina. But if you grow one in cultivation, it has a very green cortex and epidermis. And also a really old cactus is going to produce that cork cambium tissue, which is black, essentially. It's like a bark. It is a bark. And so for a cactus to start producing that takes a long time, probably over 50 years, if not 100 years, to start producing that cork cambium tissue. So that's the attractive thing, and especially for, I don't want to single out Asia. I mean, people from the United States, from Europe also poach cacti, but Asia has a thing for really old plants. They have for centuries, with bonsai trees and things like that. They love those really old, mature plants that are small. And so that fits the bill for that kind of niche as well.
Yeah.
So, it's a huge problem. A lot of habitats are being destroyed due to the expansion of civilization, but also climate change. But then it's further compounded by people taking plants to sell, like on the illegal black market, essentially. So, it's a very concerning problem. Yeah.
And this is being kind of encouraged almost by people wanting to have stuff that's more collectible. Do you think the demand for that has changed over the years, like with this houseplant trend, or do you think there was always a big problem there?
Look, there's always been an issue with it, but it's been really further compounded by social media. So people influencing one another, because, you wind the clock back even 10 years ago, and I don't even think Instagram existed.
You didn't see what other people were up to. You weren't inspired to kind of copy them more. Yeah.
It happened, but it was in a much more restricted way. People would have to go, for example, to a cactus and succulent meeting, and someone would have maybe a habitat plant on presentation, or maybe something got published in a cactus and succulent journal. But it was very controlled, and not so many people were seeing it so much. But now with social media, literally everyone's seeing it. And it's creating a lot more desire and demand, and also ease of access to, plants internationally, buyers and sellers internationally. The internet's just accelerated everything on a, almost endless kind of level. It's crazy how much it's exploded, So, social media, unfortunately, is a double-edged sword in a lot of ways. It really connects us all, but it also fuels these kind of problems, and especially.
Yeah, totally. So it's kind of how's it working then? It's the plant exporters are then putting pressure on kind of plant hunters per se to go and poach them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, I've got a public account on Instagram, and I don't get asked so much anymore, but definitely in the beginning, I was contacted by people from overseas who were wanting me to, send them cacti, basically.
I see when you share some of these. I guess they're one-offs, but it's happening in bulk as well, isn't it?
Yeah. I've made a pretty big noise about it, over the last couple of years, and so people don't really ask me anymore because they know that I'm against it. But in the beginning, I got asked quite a lot, and people still contact me and say, "Hey, look, I've been sent this message because they uploaded a picture of a Copiapoa in habitat or whatever," and so usually the people selling and distributing them to nurseries, or selling them privately on websites, or however they do it. And not traveling to the countries of origin of these plants. They're sourcing people. So it's a massive problem in South Africa and Madagascar with succulent plants there too. And quite often the people who go and actually take them from habitat get paid very little because they're willing to work for very low wages. And so then the people in sort of more developed countries are really capitalizing on the plants that are getting sent over there.
So what is in place to stop that happening, and where is that not stopping it?
Yeah, okay. So something in place is an organisation called CITES, which stands for the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Plants and Animals. And so basically it's an international agreement, and they are supposed to control endangered species, but not just endangered species, anything that's being overexploited essentially or threatened in habitats. So if it makes its way onto the CITES list, essentially, it's a controlled plant. So if the agricultural department in any particular country needs to be revising what plant material is being sent out of the country, and if they identify that plant as being on the list, it needs to have proper CITES certification that it was removed because of expansion of civilization or some other issue, not just to sort of be exploited and sold for the horticultural trade, essentially, which is where the problem comes in. I mean, but yeah, so that's something that's in place. It works in Chile somewhat, but the problem is that people always find loopholes to the problem, you know. So what happens is they usually get illegally exported over the border into Peru. So then that a cactus endemic to Peru that's on the list, if it finds its way into Peru, it's not on the list because it's not endemic to there. So the authorities don't control that species. They're only looking at species which are in their country. So, or there's corruption, you know, people get paid off to sign off the certificate.
Really hard to track it and trace it all, isn't it?
Really complicated, especially in South American borders or Mexican borders. I mean, South Africa and Madagascar has a reputation for being even more corrupt, so especially at a governmental level. But it is being controlled more in Chile now. It's getting more and more difficult for people to get their hands on habitat plants. But it still happens, you know, there's still ways where they can slip through the net. But CITES is an organisation which, you know, aims to protect the international trade of flora and fauna. You know, it started because of animals, because of tigers and gorillas or lemurs or whatever, but then they quickly sort of noticed it was happening with plants too. So it's been around, like, I don't know, since the 70s or 80s, I think. Oh no, maybe the 60s even. It's been around for a while.
But in there you also mentioned another risk, which was expansive civilization, which is obviously, you know, slightly different to that, but affecting things.
It's a global issue. I mean, happens for multiple reasons. It happens for people wanting to, you know, buy a house next to the beach or a farming property. Happens for agriculture, happens for mining, happens for new construction of roads. I mean, there's a really long list of factors, and it's a complex topic. But essentially, the planet's wild spaces are just becoming more and more encroached on every day. And it even happens in the desert. You know, I mean, the famous example is the Amazon rainforest. But, you know, when you think about it, every single house or every single city that's been constructed has been constructed on an original habitat at some point in time.
Of course.
And people get born into the world, and that's their reality. They don't know any different. They haven't seen anything different. And so that's what they become accustomed to, and that's what they accept. But the reality is that anything that we've essentially constructed, you know, has been in place of a naturally occurring habitat that we've modified. And so, I mean, it's complicated. I mean, a lot of roads and cities and towns, they're actually, like, you know, removing the spatial connections between plant populations and animal populations. They need a very big, large space to thrive, you know, and I think people really fail to see that. So, like, what happens is a housing development will happen in Patagonia, for example, right now, and they're leaving this tiny little area for conservation. You know,
but it needs the connection to the rest.
They've removed all of that, and they're introducing all kinds of different pollution. I mean, you know, they're eliminating habitat for one, but they're introducing cars, they're introducing noise, light pollution, which affects animals, nocturnal animals especially. But they're impacting on the entire functioning of that ecosystem, and they just leave this tiny little thing as though they're kind of doing the right thing, but it just doesn't work like that.
And that's purely conservation, but it's harder to repopulate something that's cactus because it's going to take such a long period of time, isn't it?
Yeah, but there's multiple factors too. I mean, you need healthy soil, you need healthy mycorrhizal relationships between plants, because we know now, and we're learning more about it with desert ecology too, that mycorrhizal fungi, desert plants are also highly mycorrhizal. And so you need, they have connections. You've got a mother plant and an adult plant, which has mycorrhizal fungi, and that helps to connect it to a seedling, which is growing even meters away from it. And it's passing nutrients to that. So if you're removing the adult plants from a population, you're impacting the survival and longevity of repopulation, naturally. And it's so complex, and I think that's where people just put it. They say, oh, that's too complex, too hard, where we like things to be simple, but it's not like that. It's very complicated.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Oh, look, I can talk for hours about this.
Yeah, no, this is really interesting because I'm learning a lot at the same time as the listener too. So it's fantastic. In terms of the industry then, like obviously it's so interconnected. We're talking about many different countries, many different cultures, ways of treating plants. But do you think they're doing enough? And what else do you think they could do? We've obviously discussed CITES, but what else could they do to stop this poaching happening? And obviously you're out there creating awareness, but what can we do?
Well, it needs to be better patrolled for one. I mean, you have some organizations, which are actually mostly private organizations, which have like park guards and,
so actual physical patrol.
Physical patrolling, and even, for example, closing the roads off at night time that go through national parks, as long as they're not transit zones, obviously, but there are a lot of it sort of happens when people are not there or not, it's not being
and these people, the poachers, know what they're looking for as well, don't they? They must be fairly plant aware with the knowledge. To some extent, but I mean, there's a plant that does occur. It depends what species, I think, a lot of the time too. But some of it's highly endemic to certain areas. But it's such a complex issue. But I think more expansion of national parks is one thing. Better patrolling of national parks is another. Whether it's having people there on the ground or installing surveillance cameras or those types of things. It needs to happen more. We need to protect more wild spaces from being encroached on, and if things are to be developed, they need to be developed on land that's already been destroyed, or that's already been utilized for industry or agriculture or projects. But what happens is soil goes stagnant, and so then people who are trying to do rotating crops, it's a win-win situation to start cutting down a forest because they're able to sell the timber for one, and they're also gaining fertile soil that they can farm for maybe, 5 years or a decade. But after that, it tends to lose its nutritional value, and then they sort of just keep expanding out further and further rather than looking for solutions like inoculating plants with different kinds of mycorrhiza or bacteria to help them fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, or other ways for them to survive in, nutrient poor soils and stuff like that. I mean, there are, organizations and companies looking into that sort of technology, and it already exists to some point, but it's far more lucrative and easier to just, cut down, sell the wood from a forest, and then it's always the shortcut.
That's the shortcut.
Have you ever been witness to any poaching at all?
Yeah, I have actually, and it was actually in a protected area. So I've got a good friend who actually works with repopulating that area. He grows cacti from seedlings. And so I actually went to this this coastal reserve, and there's a lot of people. It's highly touristic, and there are trails, and there are even signs that say do not take the flora from the habitat. And so I walk up to the lookout, and there's a guy who's holding a cactus by the root like this, like it's some kind of, like he's holding a rat, and then this woman's like got her bag, and they're like putting it into this bag. And I went over and I said, look, you can't do that. Like, these cacti are endangered. Like, they're repopulating them. There's signs here. And the guy looks at me because they know I'm a foreigner, which is, kind of like it's like, well, who are you? Where are you from? Like, this is our country. Basically, like, who are you telling us what we should be doing here? That was practically the attitude. And I was like, well, you're doing something illegal, this, and then they just took it. There was really nothing I could really do. What can I do? If I start going and taking it.
Would they potentially, is there potential to prosecute them, or that's never really elevated in that way?
Well, I mean, there is, because it is actually illegal. I mean, it's essentially a criminal behavior. And so, yeah, there are ways and means to do that, but you have to, have solid evidence and go through that whole process, which sort of, turns a lot of people off, I think, at the end of the day.
But if there was a wide-scale poaching incident, there's potential they would be prosecuted if there's, a big van with a load of cactus.
Yeah, it's happened in California, actually, with the poaching of Dahlia. There's people who have been prosecuted, and also it's happened in South Africa as well, people who have got jail time and fines. So it is, people are taking action on it. Yeah.
So as a consumer, and it's really hard in the world these days because there are so many kind of concerns about the environment and this and that, but it's so hard to know, kind of sitting in your house, what you can really do to help, and sometimes that's misguided. Sometimes it might not even have an effect, or you certainly feel like it wouldn't have an effect. With cactus being poached from the wild, what could a consumer do to help that?
I mean, it all starts at a grassroots level. Something as simple as sharing an Instagram post, liking an Instagram post, commenting on one, and so forth, because that's essentially giving that post power and approval, from the wider community. So, I see people who I know are against poaching, but they still like and share photos of plants which have obviously been poached from habitat. And most of the time it comes down to people just not being aware of what they're really looking at. What are the distinguishing features of a plant that's been poached from habitat and things like that. So unknowingly, they're sort of liking and sharing this kind of information, but that's also giving it a bigger reach to, to a wider community. And then people start asking, well, where did you get that from? I want one, and then that's sort of how
I wonder if, and I don't know if you've ever done this or anybody in your situation, but is there potentially like a kind of top 5 of plants that would typically be poached, and you could tell the difference because maybe it is a plant that has this woolly farina or something, and so if you see that in a shop, that is clearly going to be a poached plant because it's just not available in those environments? Is that a thing maybe to highlight, or has any work been done along those lines? The most commonly poached plants to avoid?
Yeah, we've actually made some infographics on social media which point out some of the high, the top 3 or top 4 or 5 poached plants.
I'm going to check those out. That's really
So we've made some. We need to really probably develop it a bit more. We have made some more specific to certain plants, because to really understand it for a particular plant, you need to have a series of photos with comparisons of what a cultivated one looks like to what a habitat one looks like to pick out the different characteristics. But generalizing it, a lot of plants which have been poached from habitat have damaged root systems, or they have kind of corky old cambium tissue and things like that. So basically, if a seller's going to sell you a plant that would easily be 100 or 50 years old, they're not going to sell it to you with damaged roots. If they've been growing it in a pot, or it's been in cultivation for so long, it doesn't make any sense for it to have, especially like clay or rocky soil on the roots. It's very habitat-y, and cut roots or damaged roots. It just doesn't make any sense if that plant's been looked after and cared for decades.
And if the plant's that old, that's going to raise suspicion as well, eh?
Absolutely. Yeah. So
I guess at that point it's too late because it's already been poached. But of course, if people do vote with their feet, then there won't be the demand for it, and it will then kind of
exactly. I mean, it's an industry that depends on people buying plants. I mean, and that's the thing. It's just like, oh, gee, it's already been done. We'll do the right thing and sort of save it. But it's just fueling the problem, and you have to kind of push past that and just ignore it if you don't want to support the issue.
Yeah, it's us as consumers that need to kind of stop the demand. So
right, exactly, yeah. It's a classic thing, supply and demand. So if the demand stops, well, then the supply is going to, sort of dwindle and hopefully stop. But
that's really interesting to not just talk to you about these kind of issues with the poach, but also just to kind of rabbit on about cactus for a bit, which is really fun. Have you got any cactus at home? Have you got a garden, or are you in an apartment? Or
no, I'm in like an apartment here. So actually, in Australia, I do actually have a property that's leased out at the moment. But I've got rock gardens, and the climate's quite favourable to having a lot of species outdoors. Yeah. So they basically just maintain themselves in a rock garden. But I don't actually have a specialised greenhouse or glass house because it just takes too much time and maintenance, and I spend so much time in the field. I'm a very outdoorsy person, and so my money and time sort of are dedicated to travel at the moment. But I do see myself sort of, maybe in a decade or so more, perhaps going back to Australia and maybe starting some kind of, small nursery or having some glass houses or something like that. It's sort of like the long-term project is while I'm younger now, to spend that time and money exploring as much as I can. And
definitely. And then kind of back in Australia, whereabouts in Victoria? Yeah,
so it's southwest Victoria, a small place called Hamilton. So it's only about 10,000 people. It's close to Warrnambool, the Great Ocean Road, which is quite a famous touristic destination. 3 hours from Melbourne, which is the capital of Victoria. So, it's an interesting little spot. I mean, the higher up you go in Australia, Sydney's got a really great climate for a lot of exotic plants. So does Brisbane. That's getting more subtropical. Australia is very large. Have you travelled
around Australia much?
Yeah, a lot. I've been to every state and territory except for Tasmania. So I've worked. That's cool.
I've been to everyone. I've been to every area myself because I was traveling there for like a year. Everywhere apart from Alice Springs and Uluru.
The very centre.
All the others, and Tasmania as well. So I was really, really fortunate. Yeah. But it's a brilliant place. Yeah, I loved Western Australia. Have you done all up the coast road there?
I haven't done the part in between Broome and
Darwin,
Perth, pretty much. But I've done all across there. I actually lived in Darwin for 2 years, and I worked in the Argyle diamond mine, which is near Kununurra and like near the Bungle.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
In Western Australia, up in the north. Yeah, so I worked for a couple of years there, and I loved it too. I mean, there's actually at Ansonia, the bottle tree. We have an Australian bottle tree, which grows there. That was really incredible to see that. And I've seen a lot of Perth and south of Perth in the southern part of WA.
Margaret River and all that.
Margaret River, Albany,
Esperance.
Esperance, yeah.
It's so cool. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I've done that part, but I've missed. I would love to do that. I've done Broome and kind of in between Broome and Kununurra, but I've missed the stretch of coast in between.
That's where you've got like Exmouth and Ningaloo with the reef just off the coast.
Yep.
Yeah, because we drove up that way and we drove back down through Kununurra. So I remember that was probably the hottest place we were as well in Kununurra when we were there.
That was kind of like hell. I mean, I worked at a mine site there, and honestly, it was not pleasant, especially in the summer. I mean, we're talking temperatures in the day of like 43 degrees with like, high 80s, 90% humidity some days. Like we're talking like you're just standing in the shade, just sweating. Like we used at smoko break, lunchtime, we would change our shirts. We would go into like the change room and take a new shirt because it was just like you were just wet. It was horrible.
Just mad. But I have to ask though, like, surely people took pieces of diamond in their pockets, no?
Yeah, I think in the beginning, but it was very highly controlled when I was there. And
did they do? Like frisk you at the end of the day or something? Or
they do random checks, but it sort of depends in where you work. So I was doing maintenance of diesel vehicles and stuff. So I wasn't in like the processing plant. So I never had direct contact with diamonds. We were just in a workshop basically.
Okay, yeah.
But people who are in direct contact with the processing of them are searched daily. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. It's amazing.
Well, we would have random checks. Yeah. Because I mean, they went for big bucks. So yeah, I think it's the only place in the world that produces the pink diamonds. Yeah.
Wow. That's cool. Before we sign off, thank you so much for your time today. But tell me, what one thing do you miss about Australia?
Oh, gee. I just think the diversity of food, actually. Australia is very, very multicultural. Even in my small town, we have, I don't know how many different restaurants, but we can go and get Indian, Thai, Greek, whatever we want. But here in South America, it's very limited. You've got a very limited sort of cuisine, especially in Chile. Peru's got more of a diverse cuisine, so does Brazil, but Chile's very bland, I find it. And the sort of exotic thing that you can find is Chinese. And so that's sort of, in Santiago, it's a little more metropolitan, a little more diverse. But I think that's the one thing I really miss about Australia. You can sort of almost get whatever you want almost anywhere.
Yeah. Similar with UK, and like when you're in the US as well, you can get whatever you want, and it's always kind of in some supersized form of it as well, which is pretty cool.
Especially in the US.
But is there not much, oh my God, I could talk to you all night, but is there not much kind of like immigration to Chile that has kind of brought different cultures over the years then? Or is it like Chinese, but there's a lot of Chinese integration in many places?
Yeah. I mean, that's been, happening in Chile for a long time, probably 100 years or more. But, and yeah, it's been a little bit more closed to other cultures. I found not like Chile from a cultural perspective, but just quite unknown.
It's a country you don't often hear in the news. It's kind of, there's not much crossover with culture, and you would hear, I don't know, Argentinian beef or Peruvian this, and you don't often hear Chilean something, apart from red wine. Maybe that's the one thing.
That's what I was going to mention. Red wine is probably their claim to fame here in Chile. I mean, they do produce pisco, which is a liqueur, and a lot of ceviche, but those two things really originated in Peru. But in coastal Chile, they do make a lot of ceviche in the north here as well. And pisco, they love to drink that. But yeah, the Chileans are probably the most famous for their wine. Yeah, Argentina for beef, Brazil for beef as well, probably. But the Andean cuisine in like Peru and Bolivia is really great. So it's but in terms of diversity of being able to find Indian food or Thai food or African food, for example, it's quite difficult. But in Australia, there's quite a lot of those types of restaurant. Greek food.
Yeah. Cool. Oh, that's really interesting, man. Cool. Yeah. Thank you for joining today. People can find you on Instagram. It is Cactus Explorer, all one word. Is that right?
Yeah. So basically, the Instagram one's Cactus Explorer with an underscore at the end of it. But on Facebook, it's just Cactus Explorer. TikTok as well, Cactus Explorer. Yeah. Twitter, which I don't use much. Yeah, but I'm most active on Facebook and Instagram. And you can look at my website, cactusexplorer.com, and that's got some more information and some details of tours and stuff like that. So, yeah.
I love that you've knitted it all together with the same title. I did a presentation for the Garden Media Group last night, and they wanted to kind of, me to kind of coach them and help them with stuff. And I said, if you're Cactus Explorer on one platform, make sure you are on the other ones, because you need to be able to easily find people, don't you? And that's cool. You've got a real marketing edge to what you're up to.
Yeah. That's something I didn't realize in the beginning, but it's right with what you say. You have to try and get those usernames as quickly as you can when new apps come out and stuff like that. Or
you've got to make it easy for people to find you wherever you are. How are you finding TikTok though? I was going to reinvest some time in TikTok.
Oh, it's sort of, it's different. It's a different medium. I mean, you can put similar content, similar videos like reels and stuff from Instagram on there, but you need to sort of really engage people with you talking. The videos which tend to sort of get people's attention is when you're actually directly communicating yourself with your voice.
Yeah, maybe that green screen thing. That's pretty. I want to test that out.
Yeah, the green screen thing. Yeah, and trying to sort of communicate information about complex topics in a really short time frame, people's attention span, you have to really get it in the first couple of seconds or else they're gone.
Definitely.
But you can't go much more than sort of a minute or so. It depends on the topic perhaps and how engaging you are. That's a kind of cool
challenge, isn't it, really? Yeah.
It's a challenge, yeah. So I haven't really got into that sort of thing much, but I would like to start, creating some type of content.
Well, I don't think there's oodles of plant content there or gardening content.
Not a lot, no.
I think it's kind of ripe for it. And the stuff I did probably a couple of years ago was kind of sharing unique plants and just kind of footage with cool music and stuff. But I think I need to perhaps go back in and do some with the green screen and kind of really,
That seems to be the type of content that kind of, circulates and gets shared more, I think.
And especially now Green Planet is out. I think people are ripe for that at the moment.
I'm hanging out for that. I actually looked it up on the website the other day, but there's nowhere that's going to be streaming it in Chile, so I have to look through maybe an Australian.
You must have a VPN, right?
Oh, I'm a little bit kind of like archaic when it comes to that. You're going to have to send me some sort of like...
Yeah, I'll message you about that privately.
Yeah.
But you can. There's ways to watch this stuff. There always is.
I always get up my hands on it somehow, but I love the BBC stuff. I'm a big fan. Yeah.
That's cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Dave. Thank you for taking the time. And hopefully our listeners have found out a little bit more about cactus, how they work, where they grow, and also the dangers that are associated with them. So thank you very much, Stefan.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on the podcast, Michael. It's great to chat. Yeah.
The music for the Plant-Based podcast is part of the song Grow by Mikey James, and our editor is Gareth Patch of Semi Echo.